Hey guys, Lewis from Recycle Bicycle Sales here. In today's video, we're going to talk about how to replace the chainrings on your bicycle. In today's video, we're going to run through the two most common types of chainrings that I've seen. These two here both happen to be Shimano chainrings, but you can contextualize it for most different brands. The reason I say that there's two slightly different ones is you've got the slightly newer ones here, where there's just a bolt on the back side. There's actually 4 bolts, so a 4-bolt chainring, I suppose, and it's only using a bolt. Whereas the slightly older style, which this one happens to be a 5-bolt, uses a bolt on the front side and a nut on the back side. So we're going to need 2 different tools to loosen this one, and we're only going to need 1 tool to loosen these ones. But if you have either of these, this video is perfect for you. So why would you actually want to replace your chainrings? I can think of 2 main reasons you'd want to change them. The first one is perhaps you want to go to a different size chainring. Maybe you're spending more time in the hills and you just want that slightly easier gear to get up the hill a little bit better. That could be one reason, or maybe you're not going fast enough coming down the hill, so you want to go bigger, whatever it is, changing the size of your chainrings. The second reason might be that perhaps they're just simply worn out. To try and explain what I think a worn out chainring looks like, you'll know if the chain's slipping, but to know what it sort of looks like, when a chainring comes out of the box, each of these individual teeth, each of these individual cogs kind of look a little bit like this. They've kind of got like a bit of a flat bit on the top. As they start to get worn out, they'll begin to sort of look a little bit more like a shark tooth. This is about as extreme as it can get. If it's got quite this far where there's absolutely no lip on the top, then you probably can't put any power down without the chain just slipping on you. So again, they're probably the 2 main reasons that we want to replace the chainring, either to change size or perhaps it's worn out. All right, so what do we actually need to remove the chainrings? First of all, we're going to need to actually take the crank off. So this one uses our little Shimano chain tool here. I reckon I read somewhere in the comment section of one of our videos further back where we were talking about how to remove and install your chainrings, where somebody in the comment section said you can use a couple of different size Allen keys, but if you don't happen to buy this tool. But anyway, Shimano crank removal tool. We're going to need a set of Allen keys. Chances are it's going to be either a 5mm or a 6mm if it's the older style. If it's the older style of chainring where you've got a bolt on one side and a backing nut on the back side, you're going to need the backing nut tool, which is just this little almost like flat tool here which will sit into the nut and hold it still while you undo the bolt on the other side. If you've got the newer style, you won't need this tool because the bolt goes straight into the chain rather than going into a nut. And if it's also the newer style, you'll also need a T30 Allen key, one of these hex, these star-shaped ones, rather than the 5mm Allen key. And because this can be a little bit of a messy job, I like to wear a set of gloves. I'm trying to do it like that. No. I like to wear a set of gloves so that I'm not covered in grease when it comes time to eat my lunch a little bit after this as well. So now I'm ready to remove the cranks here. I'm quickly just gonna fly through it here. But if you want a more in-depth explanation as to how to remove and install your cranks, then we've got a video further back on our channel as well. But the long and short is I want to put it in the small chainring at the front and the small cog at the back so that there's not too much tension on the chain. I'm gonna loosen both of the 5mm Allen key bolts. A little bit tight, there we go. And then I'm going to use my crankset tool, my lock ring tool here, loosen it, lift up the little clip, jiggle that off. Then I'm going to come around the other side and I'm going to put my hands behind there while I pull it off. Oh, stuck. Cool. Now the crankset is removed. Now we can start looking at taking the chainrings off. So now that we've got our crankset here, we can talk about removing all 5 of these bolts here. I reckon we can start by just simply putting the tool in, try and loosen it, see if it actually turns. There is a nut on the back side that might sometimes spin, but this one is staying in place. So this one might be a little bit easier, but this is where we'll end up using that backing nut tool I was talking about. If we have a closer look at these little bolts here, we can see that there's a little slit. So that's where this tool is just going to sit into there and it's just going to hold it still. Because I just want to hold the nut still while I'm loosening the bolt. That's all that this is, it's just holding it still. So this one can be a little bit of a fiddly process because you're trying to sort of balance the crankset while you're holding this tool with your other hand and trying to undo the bolt with your other hand. And it can sometimes feel a little bit difficult. So just be kind to yourself. It might take more than just a minute to undo it. at the start, all I'm really doing here is just cracking them loose. I'm not undoing them the whole way. I just want to crack it loose so that, oh, that one's a tight one, just so that I can undo them properly in a minute. So once you've cracked all 5 of these loose, you should be able to undo it now. You might even be lucky enough to be able to hold the backing nut still with just your finger. You might not need to use the tool. We're just going to take all of these out. And one thing I always like to do is just connect them back together so that when I've got them resting on the table, I know that the pair of bolts that I need are together. And I'm going to continue on with the remaining 4. So now that all of the chainring bolts have been removed, everything should just simply pull straight apart. As easy as that. If it seems really difficult and one of the chainrings seems really stubborn and it just does not want to come off, you might be able to just sort of hit it a little bit with your fist and just sort of go around until eventually it begins to crack loose. Sometimes they're just a little bit stubborn. So here we've got the big chainring and the little chainring. Now they are directional, so you can accidentally put it on upside down. So this is where we just want to make sure that we get it right. For this video, I'm not actually replacing the chainrings on this bike. I'm just simply removing them and reinstalling them because I don't have any bikes booked in that need new chainrings right now. So for the purpose of this video, we're going to refit these same chainrings. There's a couple of little things that you have to note when you put the chainrings on here. They are directional, so you can put them on backwards, and if they're put on backwards, it's not going to shift properly, the chain won't sit right, you'll probably end up dropping the chain. And I say that for both of them, both the big one and the small one. So let's make sure we get this right. When we're looking at the big chainring, the way that we know that it is on the correct way is there's this little bolt here. You can see that it's only here, and it doesn't sit anywhere else on the chainring here. It's only here. That part is going to sit just behind the chainring. So when we get our chainring through here, we're just simply going to rest that in behind the chainring here. You can still see that little bolt we were talking about just there. It's just hidden in behind that chainring. So in behind the crank arm right there. The small chainring, again, is also directional, and it's going to have another little guide as to where the crank arm needs to be. It won't have a little bolt poking off of it. This one just has a little arrow, or it might even have like a little bump in the chainring. I'll show you what both of them look like in a second. This one here just has a tiny little arrow. That's the part that's going to go up against the chainring. So that would literally, the arrow is there. It's all just going to bolt in just like that because I've got the bolt hidden behind here on the big chainring and that arrow hidden behind here on the small chainring. And they're both behind the crank arm right there. So I know that that's the correct direction. My top tip that I've got here is once we've figured out how everything needs to be lined up, just get one of the nuts and bolts in finger tight. All that this is going to do is just hold it in place while I go around and regrease all of the other ones, just like that. All I'm doing is just finding the thread. Now I'm going to go around and regrease all of these chainring bolts here. Because it's a metal bolt going into a metal nut, I just want to use a little bit of grease so that in 5 years when we go to undo it, they're not incredibly seized. We're actually able to undo them. Just put a lick of grease. It doesn't need to be all that much. And I'll put that through the chain rings, and we're just going to tighten it into the nut. It doesn't have to be tight yet. We're just putting everything in place. And I'm going to repeat this process for the remainder of the chain rings. I'm also going to do it on the one that I just put in dry as well. I'll redo that in a sec. So once you've got them all sitting in place and there's a little bit of grease on all of them, now we can go around and use our backing bolt tool, our backing nut tool, to hold all of the backing nuts still while we tighten it up. And we might end up doing a couple of laps. We'll do one lap where we're going sort of maybe 80% hard, and then we'll do another lap where we'll really just tighten everything completely. That's just so that I can spread the load across all the bolts. I don't want it to be really tight in one spot and loose in another spot. I want it to be nice and even all the way around. Cool. Now that I've done one full lap, I'm going to do a second lap, and I want to go nice and tight. Chainring bolts have a tendency of making creaking noises. Sometimes people come into the bike shop and, oh, I think my bottom bracket's broken because it's making a lot of noise and that sort of thing. Sometimes I can just simply tighten the chainring bolts and that fixes it. Not every time, but it's quite common that chainring bolts can cause a creaking noise. So usually if they're making a creaking noise, it means that they're either not tight enough or there's no grease on there and they're really dry. So make sure you do these up nice and tight. Cool. It doesn't sound like anything's loose. So we're ready to put it back in now. It's a good idea just before we chuck it in to put a lick of grease on the bottom bracket while we've got everything removed here. Not a necessity, but it's a polite thing to do to your bike, I think, while it's all pulled apart. And now we're going to refit the cranks. If you want a more in-depth explanation for what I'm actually doing here, we've done a video further back on our YouTube channel about how to remove and install the cranks on your bicycle. But long story is, we just want to make sure that the chain is actually over the chain rings. Cool, now I'm just going to finish putting the cranks back in place, and then we can talk about if we need to make any adjustments to the front derailleur. If you change chainring size, we'll need to make some adjustments. But if you've just replaced it with exactly what you already had, you might be lucky enough that you can just simply go for a ride now. Now that we've got our new chainrings on there, I just want to test that it all shifts properly. So I'm just going to pedal along, and I'm going to aggressively shift up and down, you know, really quite fast. If the chain was to fall off, I'd rather it fall off here in the work stand than out on the road. So I'm going to try a few different spots on the cassette, see if it's playing around, see if we can try and make the chain drop. Up and down, up and down, up and down. It seems like we might be pretty lucky here, actually. And I know that we're all right because Eliza's already done the roadworthy service on this one. So I just showed you how to remove and install the chainrings on the old style, which has the 5-bolt system. On the new style, it's even easier. It's literally just a bolt on the back side. It's probably the same size bolt as what was on these ones, but now you don't have to use a backing nut tool. You can just, oh, I wasn't expecting that. There we go. So sometimes they're just really tight. So be ready for that. So I know that looks difficult there on camera, but this one should be even easier to regrease the chainring, remove the chainrings and regrease the chainring bolts than what that one was, because this one is only a bolt, not a bolt and a nut. And the final bolt, because this is only a 4-bolt system, not a 5-bolt system. Now, that one will remove, and this one, which might be a little bit stubborn, you might need to sort of, you know, punch it a little bit, get it to remove itself from the actual chainring. There we go. And then it will come straight off like that. Cool. So these chainrings are going to install the exact same way as the old style. A little side note here, if you change the size of your chainrings, perhaps you went up a size or you went down a size, you might need to adjust where the front derailleur sits, whether it's raising it up a little bit or raising it down a little bit. You want to make sure that the front derailleur is not going to touch on the big chainring when you shift across. You want to make sure that there's a little bit of a gap there. I can't remember the exact number Shimano say, but it might be like 2 millimeters or 3 millimeters. It's quite close, but you don't want it to be touching. If you want a more in-depth video about how to actually adjust the front derailleur, let us know in the comments below. But hopefully if you've replaced it with the same size chainrings you've already got, you shouldn't need to make any adjustments. Also, if you have changed to a larger size of chainring, you might even need to put on a slightly longer chain. I hope you guys have learned something in this video about how to replace your chainrings. We ran through the older style of Shimano and the newer style of Shimano, but they are quite similar. This will be contextualized across lots of different brands of crankset anyway. We just happen to use Shimano ones here in today's video. If you reckon this video was helpful, or maybe there's something that we missed over or something that you've learned throughout the video, let us know in the comments below. I'd love to hear it. Otherwise, I'm gonna say thanks for watching and we'll see you guys in the next video. See ya.